A man is dead, found in his luxury Moscow apartment, a bullet in his head. Authorities called it a suicide. His daughter called it a silencing. And weeks before his body was discovered, his name appeared in the Jeffrey Epstein files. Not as a footnote, not as a random connection, but as a bridge between the most notorious trafficking operation in modern history and some of the most powerful names in American entertainment. Right now, in March of 2026, the internet is connecting dots that powerful people do not want connected. And the man at the center of it all is someone most of you have never heard of. Umar Jabrilov, a Russian businessman, a former senator, a man who called Ghislaine, Maxwell, his soulmate, a man who posted photos with Jay-Z, Diddy, and Beyonce 1 month after Diddy got arrested. And now, he's gone. Before we go any further, be sure to leave a like and subscribe because the people connected to this story are going to do everything in their power to make sure this doesn't get seen. This is bigger than people realize. Way bigger. And we're just getting started. Let's set the stage. Because to understand why this matters, you have to understand who Umar Jabrilov actually was. Most people in the West have never heard this man's name. And that might not be an accident. Jabrilov was a Russian businessman and politician. He ran for president of Russia in the year 2000. Finished last. Barely anyone voted for him. But here's the thing about powerful men. The title doesn't always tell you the power. Because outside of that failed presidential bid, Jabrilov was operating at the highest levels of global society. He served as an advisor to Sergei Prokhodko, who was an assistant to the president of Russia. That's not a small connection. That is a direct line to the Kremlin. And in the business world, he was a retail and hospitality mogul. He owned the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow. He founded a group called Plaza. This man had money. He had access. He had influence. And he knew how to move in rooms that most people never even get close to. But where it gets interesting is the controversies. Because this wasn't just some clean-cut businessman. In 1996, his American business partner, a man named Paul Tatum, was murdered in a contract killing. Before he died, Tatum accused Jabrilov of blackmailing him. Jabrilov was never charged. He denied any involvement, but that accusation followed him. And then in 2017, Jabrilov was arrested for firing a pistol into the ceiling of the Four Seasons Hotel in Moscow. His explanation? He cited a concussion sustained in war. He was essentially claiming PTSD. Now, you may be reading that and thinking, okay, this is just some wild Russian billionaire. A guy who lives fast and plays by his own rules. And maybe that's partly true. But the picture gets a whole lot more complicated when you look at who he was spending his time with. Because Jabrilov wasn't just connected to Russian power. He was deeply connected to global celebrity power. He was frequently photographed with international A-listers. Naomi Campbell, Roberto Cavalli, and Sean Diddy Combs. Now here's where you need to really pay attention. Because in November 2024, 1 month after Diddy was arrested on federal charges on September 16, 2024, Jabrilov posted a series of photos on his Instagram page. Not just photos with Diddy. Photos with Diddy, Jay-Z, and Beyonce. Together, all in one post. And the caption he wrote said, "My friendship with Jay-Z, P. Diddy, and Beyonce." He specifically tagged them. He specifically said friendship. And he specifically posted it right after one of the most high-profile arrests in entertainment history. Now you can decide for yourself what that means. Maybe he was trying to help Diddy by showing solidarity. Maybe it was something else entirely. But what you cannot deny is that the photos exist, the caption exists, the connection exists, and the timeline is undeniable. Now, this isn't just about a few celebrity photos, because Jabrilov's name didn't just pop up in Instagram posts. His name appeared in the Jeffrey Epstein files, released by the U.S. Department of Justice, and in those files is a connection that ties this Russian businessman directly to Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, and potentially to some of the most powerful people in American entertainment. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. The files exist. The emails exist. And the man, who could have explained it all, is no longer here to answer any questions. Let's start with the Epstein connection, because this is where everything shifts. The DOJ released documents. Included in those documents was an email exchange dated May 2001. In that email, Jabrilov wrote to Ghislaine Maxwell. He said, and I'm quoting directly from the document, "Dear Ghislaine, I'm back from London, planning to be in Moscow. Really want to see you, but I need to know exactly when you arrive because I want to take care of you and arrange welcoming things. Wishing you all the best." That's what he wrote to Maxwell, and Maxwell responded. She wrote back, "Sorry that we did not come last week. Got sidetracked and ended up in France. However, Jeffrey, Tom and I are coming next week, arriving Friday. Will you be around? Can we get together? Let me know. Hope you are well. Jeffrey, Tom, and I." That's Ghislaine Maxwell writing that Jeffrey Epstein was planning to visit Moscow, and Jabrilov was arranging the welcome. Now, let's just sit with that for a second. The year is 2001. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are operating their network, and a Russian billionaire with political connections to the Kremlin is inviting them to Moscow and promising to take care of them. That's not a casual acquaintance. That's not a chance meeting at a party. That is a deliberate, coordinated relationship. And Jabrilov himself acknowledged knowing Epstein by name. He spoke publicly about Maxwell's imprisonment, called her the most charming woman, his soulmate. Now, I need you to understand who Ghislaine Maxwell is, because she wasn't just Epstein's girlfriend. She was his co-conspirator, convicted in federal court for sex trafficking, and Jabrilov is calling her his soulmate. So now the picture starts to form. And I mean, when you just step back and look at what we have so far, it's staggering. You have a Russian billionaire with Kremlin connections who is actively coordinating with Epstein and Maxwell, who owns luxury hotels in Moscow, who has a history of violence and accusations following him, and who is photographed over multiple years with Jay-Z, Diddy, and Beyonce. And the article that broke this story puts it perfectly. It says Jabrilov was a bridge, a man whose personal relationships physically linked the Epstein-Maxwell trafficking operation to entertainment access. Think about what a bridge does. A bridge connects two worlds that would otherwise have no direct path to each other. On one side, the Epstein-Maxwell network, private islands, trafficking operations, global elites. On the other side, some of the most famous, most powerful entertainers in America. Jabrilov was the road between them, and now that road is destroyed. And the article asks a question that I think every single one of you needs to sit with. Who benefits from the destruction of that bridge? Now, let's talk about Jay-Z, because this is where it gets complicated. And I have to be careful here, because there are things that are alleged, and there are things that are documented. So let's stick to what we know. What we know is that Jay-Z has repeatedly and publicly downplayed his relationship with Diddy. He's implied they weren't close. He suggested their connection was professional and distant. But then, photos like the ones Jabrilov posted exist. You can see them together, on yachts, at the Cannes Film Festival, with this very man, Jabrilov, who is now in the Epstein files. And Jabrilov described, specifically, how he met both Diddy and Jay-Z at the Cannes Film Festival, where his yacht was docked alongside theirs. That's not some industry event. That's not a red carpet crossing. Docked yachts at Cannes. That's intimate. That's deliberate social time with people you actually know. Now, when somebody's repeatedly telling you that a connection is minimal, and then photo after photo, source after source, connection after connection, tells a completely different story, I mean, at some point you have to ask yourself, why are they working so hard to minimize it? What is the reason for downplaying something that clearly existed? And I'm not here to answer that definitively, but I am here to tell you that when powerful people lie about small things, it's usually because the big things are even bigger than we imagine. Now, let's talk about the legal layer, because this isn't just social circles and photos. Jay-Z is currently facing a separate civil lawsuit, a sexual assault allegation, which he has denied through his attorney, Alex Spiro. But here is where this gets layered. Alex Spiro is the mentee of Ben Brafman, and Ben Brafman is Diddy's lawyer. Now, think about that chain. Diddy's lawyer trained Alex Spiro. Alex Spiro is now Jay-Z's lawyer, and both Jay-Z and Diddy are now entangled in legal situations that have threads leading back to the same ecosystem that Jabrilov was connected to. I'm not saying Alex Spiro did anything wrong. I'm not saying the lawyer connection is sinister by itself, but in a story about networks and how powerful people protect each other, the fact that their legal representation is connected by a direct mentorship line is something worth noting. It is a pattern, and as we'll get to in just a moment, this story is full of patterns. Let's go deeper into the timeline, because I think the timeline tells a story that words alone can't fully capture. September 16th, 2024. Diddy is arrested. The entire entertainment world goes silent. People who used to post about him stop posting. People who called him a friend start claiming they barely knew him. The scramble to distance was immediate. It was almost cartoonish how fast some people ran. And then, 1 month later, November 8th, 2024, Jabrilov posts those photos. Photos with Jay-Z, Diddy, and Beyonce. And writes, "My friendship with Jay-Z, P. Diddy, and Beyonce." Now I want you to think about the timing. The whole world is distancing themselves from Diddy. And this Russian businessman, who is already tied to Maxwell and Epstein, goes the complete opposite direction. He doubles down. He says friendship publicly. He tags them. He tells his Telegram followers he's going to share the full story. What made him do that? Was he trying to help Diddy? Was he sending a message to someone? Or was he trying to establish his own importance? Trying to make himself valuable? Trying to use those connections as some kind of protection? I don't know, but those are the questions. And then, fast forward to early 2026. His name appears in the newly released DOJ Epstein documents. The documents that connect him to Maxwell and Epstein. The documents that potentially link him to the entertainment network around Diddy and Jay-Z. And then, March 2nd, 2026. He's found dead. Bullet in the head. Authorities say suicide. His daughter says silencing. And here's where things really get deep. Because Jabrilov is not the first person connected to the Epstein scandal to die under questionable circumstances. This is not a coincidence pattern that just started with him. Epstein himself died in a federal prison, in a maximum security facility, on suicide watch. And somehow, the cameras malfunctioned, the guards fell asleep, and he was found dead. The official ruling was suicide, but the circumstances were so implausible that even mainstream media struggled to report it with a straight face. And since then, the list of people connected to this scandal who have died, disappeared, or been silenced continues to grow. Jabrilov is now one more name on that list. A man who had direct email contact with Maxwell and Epstein. A man who hosted them in Moscow. A man who knew Jay-Z and Diddy personally. A man whose daughter believes he was murdered. And the timing, right after his name appeared in federal documents. I mean, how else do you explain this? What are the odds? What are the actual statistical odds that a man whose name just surfaced in a massive federal investigation dies of a self-inflicted gunshot wound weeks later? Now, let's talk about what the article is really saying, because I think sometimes the most important messages are buried in the framing. The article makes a point that I made before, and it's worth repeating here. We keep being directed toward Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein, the individual. Jeffrey Epstein, the monster. And yes, Epstein was monstrous, but focusing only on Epstein means we never look at the network around him. We never look at the infrastructure. We never ask who was supplying the connections, who was providing the access, who was building the bridges between Epstein's world and the worlds of the ultra-powerful. Jabrilov was one of those bridges. His Moscow connections, his hotel empire, his relationship with Maxwell, his yacht parties with American entertainers, all of that made him useful, not just as a social contact, but as a connector, a person who could move between different circles without raising red flags, because in his world, everyone was connected to everyone. That's how these networks survive, not through one central hub, but through a web of connectors. People who don't look dangerous on the surface. People who just look rich and social and globally connected. And Jabrilov fit that profile perfectly. Now, let me talk about the Cannes Connection specifically, because this is important. The Cannes Film Festival is not just a movie event. It is a gathering of global power, film executives, tech billionaires, politicians, royalty, and entertainers, all in the same space, on the same yachts, at the same parties, and Jabrilov said directly that he met Diddy and Jay-Z at Cannes, where his yacht was docked alongside theirs. Now, has come up before in conversations about Epstein, about the kinds of parties that happen on those boats, about the kinds of access that money and power bought in that environment. And I'm not saying anything specific happened on those boats with those people. I want to be clear about that. But I am saying that when the same locations keep appearing in story after story after story connected to this network, you have to start asking questions, because coincidences pile up until they stop being coincidences. Let's talk about Jay-Z's denial, because I think the denial itself is revealing. When Diddy was arrested, Jay-Z was one of the loudest voices to distance himself. He downplayed their connection in a way that felt almost aggressive, like he wasn't just distancing, he was erasing. And here's the thing about erasure. When you erase something from history, you draw attention to exactly what you're trying to hide, because people notice, the fans notice, the internet notices, and the internet doesn't forget. There are decades of photos, decades of collaborations, decades of public appearances where Jay-Z and Diddy were clearly in the same orbit. Rock Nation and Bad Boy weren't competitors living on opposite coasts. They were two pillars of the same entertainment empire. And now we have Jabrilov, a man connected to Epstein and Maxwell, who describes their relationship with him as a friendship, who photographed himself with them repeatedly over multiple years, who specifically described meeting them on yachts at Cannes. So the question isn't whether the connection existed. The photos prove the connection existed. The question is, what was the nature of that connection? And why is there such a desperate effort to minimize it? Now, I want to be fair here, because being connected to someone is not the same as being complicit in what they do. Jabrilov might have been a social connector, without Jay-Z or Beyoncé knowing anything about his relationship with Epstein and Maxwell. That is a real possibility. Powerful people move in overlapping social circles all the time. And just because someone knows someone doesn't mean they knew everything about them. But here's where it gets complicated. The DOJ didn't release these documents by accident. These are official federal documents. And in those documents, Jabrilov's name is there. His emails are there. His connection to Maxwell and Epstein is documented. And the same man's photos with Jay-Z, Diddy, and Beyoncé are on his public Instagram page. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's documentation meeting documentation. And when you have documentation on both sides, the logical, reasonable question is, were these worlds aware of each other? And to what extent? I'm not claiming I know the answer, but I am saying nobody should be allowed to simply walk away from that question without answering it. Let's talk about Diddy specifically, because Diddy's situation is the clearest picture we have of how these worlds connected. Diddy was convicted. He is currently serving time in federal prison. His crimes were not alleged. They were proven. And what his trial revealed is that the kind of operation he was running required infrastructure. It required venues. It required willing participation from people who knew what was happening. It required connections to people who could provide access, resources, and protection. That kind of operation doesn't run in a vacuum. It runs through networks. Networks of people who are connected through money, through parties, through yachts, through international travel. And Jabrilov was exactly the kind of person who exists in those networks. A man with hotels, a man with political protection, a man with connections to both Russian power and American entertainment, a man who was on familiar terms with Epstein and Maxwell. That's not a small thing. That is a very specific kind of person. And that person is now dead. Now, let's talk about the daughter, because she said something that deserves attention. When Russian authorities called it suicide, Jabrilov's daughter called it a silencing. Now, think about what it takes for a daughter to make that accusation publicly. That is not a light thing to do. That is not grief talking without reason. That is a daughter who knows something, who knows her father, who knows the world her father moved in, and who believes, with enough conviction to say it publicly, that he did not die by his own hand. And she said this in the context of a man whose name had just appeared in federal documents, a man who had publicly connected himself to people under massive federal scrutiny, A man who had announced he was going to tell his story. Remember the caption on those photos? He didn't just post the pictures and walk away. He specifically told his Telegram followers, "Follow the link in my profile. I've decided to reveal some details." He was building to something. He was preparing to tell a story. And now, he never will. That is what his daughter is saying was silenced. Not just a man, a story. And now, where things really get important, is understanding the scope of what the Epstein files represent. Because this isn't just one Russian billionaire. This isn't just one set of emails. The Epstein files are a roadmap to one of the most extensive, powerful, and protected criminal networks in modern history. A network that touched politics, finance, entertainment, royalty, international business, and the DOJ has been releasing pieces of it slowly. Every release sends shockwaves. Every release reveals new names, new connections, new evidence of how deep and wide this network actually went. And the entertainers connected to this world haven't fully been examined yet. The focus has been on politicians, on financiers, on royals, but the entertainment layer, the cagnottes, the international parties, the celebrity access, that layer is still being unwrapped. And Jabrilov was one of the threads that could have been pulled to unravel that specific layer. That thread is now gone, and whoever pulled it knew exactly what they were doing. Let's talk about the larger pattern here, because this isn't just about one man, one story, one connection. This follows a pattern that we've seen before. When powerful people are exposed, the people who can corroborate that exposure tend to disappear, sometimes literally, sometimes through legal pressure, sometimes through public discrediting, sometimes through deals that keep them quiet. The Epstein story has been full of that pattern. Witnesses who changed their stories, documents that got sealed, investigations that stalled, and people who were positioned to connect the biggest dots, ending up unable to connect anything. Jabrilov was positioned to connect very specific dots. His relationship with Maxwell and Epstein was documented. His relationship with Jay-Z, Diddy, and Beyonce was photographed. He had announced his intention to share more details publicly, and he had a Telegram channel where he was building toward telling the story to an audience. He was, in every meaningful sense, a live wire, a man with information, a man with motive to share it, a man with a platform to share it on. And now, the wire has been cut. I want to go back to something that I think gets lost in the big picture details, the photos, because sometimes the most powerful evidence is the simplest evidence. Jabrilov posted those pictures from his own account, his own Instagram, with his own caption. He called it his friendship with Jay-Z, P. Diddy, and Beyonce. He wasn't selling a story to a tabloid. He wasn't leaking to a gossip blog. He was proud of those friendships. He displayed them publicly on his own platform, and the photos show multiple years, multiple occasions, multiple settings, France, yachts, parties. These are not chance encounters. These are repeated, intentional gatherings. And the man in those photos, whose name is now in the Epstein files, and whose body was found in his Moscow apartment with a bullet in his head, was the connection point between one world and another, between the Epstein-Maxwell operation and the entertainment elite. You cannot look at all of this together and feel nothing. You cannot look at all of this together and think there are no questions worth asking. And here is the thing that I keep coming back to. The question the article poses: who benefits from the destruction of this bridge? Because that's the detective question, right? That's the question that cuts through all the noise. Who benefits? Who needed Jabrilov to not be able to testify? Who needed him to not be able to explain the nature of those friendships? Who needed the link between the Epstein world and the entertainment world to remain severed and unspoken? I'm going to let you answer that in the comments, because I think you already know what you think, and I think you already know which names come to mind. And I think that's exactly why this story matters. Not because Jabrilov was some saint. He wasn't. His history is complicated. His connections were dark. His world was not clean. But none of that changes the fact that he held information, and now that information is buried with him. So where does this all go from here? What does Jabrilov's death actually mean for everything that's unfolding? Here's what I think we're going to see. The Epstein files are not done being released. The DOJ is still moving. The federal machinery is still grinding. And as more documents surface, more names are going to appear, more connections are going to be documented, and more questions are going to be directed at people who have spent years building carefully constructed public images. The entertainment layer of the Epstein story is not closed. If anything, Jabrilov's death draws more attention to it. Because when a man dies right after his name surfaces in a federal document, people pay attention. The internet pays attention. Journalists pay attention. Investigators pay attention. And the very attempt to silence the story becomes the story. That's the irony of this situation. If Jabrilov had simply been allowed to tell his story publicly on his Telegram channel, maybe it would have faded. Maybe it would have been dismissed. Maybe it would have been buried in the noise. But instead, he's dead. And now every word he was preparing to say is magnified 1,000 times. Because now everyone wants to know what he was going to say. Now, let's talk about Jay-Z specifically going forward. Because Jay-Z is going to have to address this. Not in a legal brief filed by Alex Spiro. Not in a carefully worded public statement. The court of public opinion is not handled by lawyers. The internet doesn't care about legal strategy. And the accumulation of connections, the photos, the Cannes yachts, the Jabrilov friendship claim, the Epstein file proximity, all of it is building toward a moment where silence is no longer a viable strategy. And here's the larger cultural implication. For decades, the entertainment industry has operated on an assumption that certain people were untouchable, that fame and wealth and cultural power created a kind of immunity, an immunity from scrutiny, an immunity from accountability. Diddy represented the ultimate collapse of that assumption. The most powerful man in hip-hop, the biggest party thrower in the world, the man whose name was synonymous with power and access. And he is in prison right now, convicted, and his conviction opened a door that cannot be closed. Because once you establish that these networks are real, once you establish that the parties were not just parties, once you establish that the access was being used for something sinister, the next question is always, who else was in the network? Who else attended? Who else knew? Who else benefited? And Jabrilov was one of the people who could have answered those questions. Could have. Now the question becomes, what remains? What documentation exists that even Jabrilov's death can't erase? Because information doesn't die the way people do. Emails persist. Documents persist. Federal evidence persists. And the DOJ has already shown that they are willing to release it. The bigger picture here is about the architecture of power, about how people at the top of entertainment, finance, and politics build interlocking systems of protection, how lawyers connect, how social networks overlap, how friendships in places like can serve purposes that go beyond enjoying the Mediterranean. Jabrilov was a piece of that architecture, a very specific, very important piece. And his death, in my opinion, and in the opinion of his own daughter, was not a coincidence. It was maintenance. Maintenance of a system that cannot afford certain bridges to remain standing. The question now is whether enough of the structure is already exposed, that it doesn't matter whether enough documents, enough emails, enough photographs, enough federal filings already exist in the public record, that the bridge was only symbolic at this point, that the information it carried has already crossed, and that the people who needed it destroyed may have already lost the war they thought they were winning. And so now, with all of that said, I want to know what you think. What do you make of Umar Jabrilov and his connection to Epstein, Maxwell, Jay-Z, and Diddy? Do you think his death was a suicide? Or do you believe, like his own daughter does, that this was a silencing? Do you think the Epstein files still have more revelations to come about the entertainment world? And what do you think it means for Jay-Z specifically, that a man who called him a personal friend and who is now documented as having connections to Epstein and Maxwell is now dead? These are the questions that the internet is asking right now, and I think they deserve real answers. Not legal statements, not PR management. Real answers. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you made it to this point in the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It genuinely helps me keep making content like this. Content that the people connected to these stories would prefer you never see. Your support means everything. It is what makes this channel possible. And it is what makes sure these stories stay alive, even when powerful people want them buried. Thank you for watching. Seriously, thank you. But in the meantime, if you want to see how the Diddy conviction connects to an even wider network of protected elites that goes far beyond what was presented at trial, well, you are not going to want to miss this one. So check out the suggested video.